In a sea of 15 million mourners, one image traveled around the world within hours. A giant red sign reading #KillTrump held up in the middle of Iran's state funeral for its assassinated leader. It's a small detail in a massive week of news, but I think that single flag tells you more about where this ceasefire actually stands than any diplomatic statement issued this week. Over the next 20 minutes, I want to place that flag in its full context. What kind of funeral this actually was, the specific words being chanted alongside it, the foreign governments who showed up to witness it, and a much darker undercurrent running beneath the state-organized grief that most coverage of this flag completely leaves out. This isn't really a story about one sign. It's a story about what a government chooses to permit, encourage, and broadcast to the world, and what that choice reveals about its actual intentions going into the next phase of negotiations. Let's establish exactly what was happening when that sign appeared. Iran began a multi-day funeral on Saturday, July 4th, for Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and 4 members of his family, all killed in the American and Israeli airstrike that opened this war on February 28th. Hundreds of thousands of mourners gathered at Tehran's Grand Mosalla complex, beating their chests in grief, a traditional practice at Shiite funerals, while officials unveiled Khamenei's flag-draped coffin in a glass case alongside the smaller caskets of his relatives. The chants accompanying this grief were not subtle. Mourners called out, "Our word is one, revenge, revenge," and more explicitly, we will kill he who killed our imam." One eulogist told the crowd, according to reporting from the Times of Israel, "We have come not for the funeral, but for revenge," adding, "We're never going to give up your blood," which is the reddest line. It was into this atmosphere, already saturated with explicit calls for retaliation, that the #KillTrump sign was raised and photographed, not as an isolated fringe outburst, but as one more expression among many of the same sentiment. Here's what makes the imagery even more pointed. The crowd wasn't just carrying anti-American signage in isolation. Reporting from the Times of Israel and NPR both noted that alongside the red revenge flags, mourners also waved the yellow flag of Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group that has been fighting Israeli forces in southern Lebanon throughout this war. Representatives from Hezbollah, as well as fellow Iran-backed group Hamas, attended the Saturday ceremonies and met directly with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, according to Iranian state media. On the foreign delegation side, the funeral also drew Russia's former president, Dmitry Medvedev, representing Moscow, and Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, along with the president of Iraq and Afghanistan's foreign minister. So the physical space where that #KillTrump sign was photographed wasn't just a domestic grief event, it was a room containing Hezbollah, Hamas, Russia, Pakistan, and Iraq simultaneously, a visual snapshot of exactly which international actors Iran considers itself aligned with, at the precise moment its own population was chanting for the American president's death. Trump's reaction to the funeral, delivered before this specific sign had even circulated widely, was notably dismissive rather than alarmed. According to reporting picked up across multiple outlets, including PBS and ABC, Trump said of Iran, "They want to settle so badly, we gave them a week off for a funeral." That framing, treating a 7-day mourning period for an assassinated head of state as a favor Washington granted Tehran, is itself a signal of how each side is narrating the same set of facts. Where Iran sees a nation in genuine grief, demanding accountability, Trump's own language frames the funeral as a pause his administration is generously tolerating. That contrast matters because it shows neither side is treating this week as a moment for de-escalating rhetoric. Iran's crowds are calling for Trump's death in the streets. Trump is publicly characterizing Iran's national mourning period as an inconvenience to the peace process he's trying to close. Both statements are technically compatible with the ceasefire still holding on paper, and both are exactly the kind of provocative public rhetoric that makes an already fragile truce harder to sustain. Here's the part of this story that gets almost no attention, and I think it's the most important detail in the entire funeral. According to Iranian human rights organization HRANA, cited by NPR, Iran's own Revolutionary Guard Corps was responsible for killing at least 7,000 people during nationwide anti-government protests that broke out in December of 2025, months before this war with Israel and the U.S. even began. NPR spoke to a 32-year-old woman whose brother was killed in those protests. She told the network, speaking on condition of anonymity out of fear of government retaliation, that Khamenei's funeral gave her no comfort at all. Even in the Ayatollah's death, she said, he still causes us torment. Think about what that means. The same government orchestrating 15 million people into choreographed, camera-ready grief and revenge chants for its assassinated leader had, only months earlier, killed thousands of its own citizens for protesting that same leadership. The hashtag Kill Trump sign, the Hezbollah flags, the foreign dignitaries, all of it is a highly produced, state-sanctioned display of unity. The woman NPR spoke to represents a version of Iran that exists simultaneously, one that isn't chanting for revenge against America, but quietly grieving family members killed by the very state now staging this funeral, too afraid to say so publicly. Put these threads together, and the hashtag Kill Trump flag stops looking like a spontaneous outburst of grief and starts looking like one carefully permitted piece of a much larger state-managed message. A government that controls who attends, which flags are visible on camera, and which chants get amplified to international media, chose to let that sign be photographed and circulated worldwide. At the same moment, that same government was actively negotiating with the Trump administration in Doha, warning Britain and France over naval movements near Hormuz, and hosting Hezbollah, Hamas, and Russia's former president in the same room. And underneath all of it sits a population that, based on HRANA's documented death toll from last December's crackdown, has genuine reasons to distrust this same leadership that has nothing to do with America or Israel at all. So here's the question worth sitting with. When a government simultaneously negotiates a ceasefire, permits signs calling for a foreign president's death at a funeral it fully controls, and has a documented recent history of killing thousands of its own citizens for dissent, which version of that government should the rest of the world actually be responding to? Because right now, Washington and Tehran are both making calculated bets that the other side's public rhetoric doesn't reflect its real, private position. That's a reasonable bet to make once. It's a considerably riskier one to keep making indefinitely,